So recently, I finally finished reading 10, the manga that completes the story of the coolest mahjong legend Akagi Shigeru. The ending left me with many thoughts, and as a result, it launched me into a mission to read every Fukumoto manga. But first, I want to go back to where it all started. Ever since I first watched the anime mahjong legend Akagi, the genius who descended into the darkness back in 2017, which is already 10 years too late, something began stirring in my heart. I was familiar with the ugly yet iconic art style of Nobuyuki Fukumoto, and I was familiar with the show as being the mahjong anime out there. I'm not into mahjong, nor do I know any of the rules, but having watched Saki back in the day, it wasn't a totally brand new concept for me. So I was like, let's give it a shot. And yeah, it was surprisingly good. To sum it up, it's the 1950s and it starts with a guy in debt putting his life on the line in a game of mahjong with the Yakuza until a 13-year-old boy named Akagi Shigeru stumbles in, who so happens to be hiding from the police after illegally driving a car in a chicken run race and driving off a cliff into the ocean. He plays a game with the Yakuza despite knowing nothing about mahjong, and everyone realizes the kid's a natural-born gambler who doesn't fear death. And that's how you know this show isn't your typical moe girl shit. Of course, you don't need to know anything about mahjong, and honestly, as long as you know how most card games work, you can kind of pick up at least the basic rules. And even if you don't know what a pawn or a hanuman is, you can at least know their value through the character's reactions. I'd say it starts off a little slow, but before you know it, you're kind of in it. It's very tense and suspenseful, and the titular character Akagi really is the star of the show. The characters are unique and strange, but it's still grounded in reality, and the things they say are logical, philosophical, and sometimes very real. It mostly follows Akagi's badass life story as he ages, and while it is a mahjong anime, it also has a surprising amount of shonen action and other conflicts outside of mahjong. What makes the show fascinating is that it wasn't about if he'd win a game or not, it was about how he went and won it. The show felt smart and engaging. As an anime though, it's still pretty mid. It's the typical lower qualities 2000s anime with very little animation. It's a pretty lengthy 26 episode anime that's mostly just talking and psychological warfare, and at the end of the day, it's still primarily about mahjong. The final arc of the story doesn't finish and skips through it before creating its own ending. And at the time the anime came out, in 2006, no one would be able to see the ending of Akagi until 12 years later. So suffice to say, the anime ends at a good point. Overall, the anime caters to a very niche demographic and is not an anime I would recommend to most people. If I had to compare this anime to mainstream anime tastes, it would be like Death Note's psychological battles with the craziness of that one episode from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 3 where they fight Darby the Gambler, and Akagi is like Saitama from One Punch Man, except instead of being bored and super strong, he's just bored and super goddamn lucky. Side note, while editing this video trying to find footage, I ended up just rewatching the first few episodes of Akagi, and it's honestly so gripping. Like, it's been almost a decade since I watched it, so I couldn't remember everything. But coming back to this, each episode makes me want to get to the next one, and I didn't realize how beginner friendly its first few episodes were. So in case you didn't know, Akagi is written by the same guy who did Kaiji. Now, I don't want to get too into it, cause this ain't about him, but of all the Fukumoto mangas, the one that most people recognize is Kaiji Ultimate Survivor. Clearly, it's the most popular of Fukumoto's works, but I have to say, after coming off of Akagi, I hated this show. It's so frustrating to watch that I actually couldn't get myself to finish it. Kaiji is the lowest, most unbearable, pitiful scum I've ever bared witness to, and watching him struggle his way to victory while crying and complaining all the way through is so exhausting. He's an incredibly unlikable character. Kaiji is also very representative of late 90s, early 2000s male protagonists, which I am severely sick of. And the other thing that I've always personally hated was the death game genre, the battle royales. I don't like stories where the end goal is to just kill a bunch of people, have senseless violence, and use death for shock value. It never ends well for the protagonist, and the evil controlling corporations at the top always win. I don't want to watch that for entertainment, I just go watch the news. The one thing I give the story credit for is that the games themselves are pretty interesting and requires real strategy. It's just hard to cheer Kaiji on when he's so excessively annoying. Kaiji himself just ruins everything for me since he's so easily manipulated, emotionally unstable, and incapable. Maybe a lot of people identify with that since, you know, it has 6 different series with the current one still going. But Kaiji really isn't my thing. I told myself if I finished all the main Fukumoto manga, I would come back to the show and at least finish it off. However, Kaiji is still an important character to reference because of how different these two people are. Kaiji struggles to survive in a scummy death game, and his victories are just as painful to watch. Akagi lives his life freely with no restrictions. In fact, he goes to the trouble of gambling his life away because he has no desire for money or fame. He does it for the thrill, but even then, he still helps those around him. Kaiji, on the other hand, can barely maintain anything in his life, and will try and fail to manipulate others for a chance at success. Akagi is the man you want to be, and Kaiji is the man you really are. And for me, my disdain for Kaiji only exemplifies how cool and awesome Akagi is. While Akagi is essentially an overpowered protagonist who can gamble his life away and always win, what makes the show engaging is seeing how he affects other people in his life. While the anime wasn't like life-changing or anything, it was something that stayed in my head, and occasionally I think back to Akagi Shigeru as sort of a comfort character. Especially during the time of 2018, personally I was pretty depressed with life and everything going on in the world. The late 2010s was a changing of the guard moment in society, so life was looking pretty grim, and I was just really sad that a lot of things I used to love are now gone or no longer spark joy. As a result, I grew to be pretty nihilistic, jaded, and unemotional, which in turn made Akagi such a delight to watch on screen. So in 2022, during a rough time in my life involving multiple hospital visits, I would spend the pockets of free time I had reading Akagi, now that the manga was officially over. Emotionally, it was the perfect coping mechanism and really made me philosophize life, the universe, and everything. Akagi's ambitions felt relatable, and in a weird way, Akagi's desire for death made one appreciate life just a bit more. It touches on themes of Thanatos or the death drive and nihilism in a way that's much darker than other philosophical manga that focuses on life and hope. Not that I don't vibe with those themes either, but Akagi is interesting in the way that it portrays these seemingly negative bad traits as something that's just part of one's life. It's written in a way where Akagi's entire personality isn't just ha ha ha, I want to KMS, lol, or something. Or Akagi's depicted as being depressed and being a useless worm in society because of those thoughts. It's not like played as a joke or a trope, it's just kind of there as part of human nature, which is pretty much what the death drive is. Along with the life drive, or eros, they are two complementary things that a person has. Rather than deny death, one should accept it, memento mori and all that jazz. But I'm kind of going on a tangent. Either way, Akagi is a story that makes you contemplate life a little. Critically speaking, I don't think the manga is worth reading unless you really like the intricacies of the mahjong strategies, because the anime already pretty much one-to-one translates the story. The only thing you're really missing is the 200 more chapters of the Washizu arc. And frankly, reading over 200 chapters of a single game where the opponent Washizu is just totally delusional and starts going into La La Land for multiple chapters isn't particularly exciting to me. The fact this final arc went on for 20 real-life years is kind of insane, and not really in a good way. However, I do think the ending of the manga is satisfying, and I like that unlike the anime where it time skips to an older Akagi walking alone in the night, the manga ends a bit after the Washizu arc with Akagi and his companion Osamu walking down the road in a calm, carefree manner. And I think that's what makes Akagi an even bigger badass. While he can psychologically dismantle a man, Akagi is also a pretty chill guy. Unlike other Fukumoto characters, Akagi feels like a benevolent god. He is so above mankind that he doesn't have selfish humanly desires, and a lot of the things he does is simply putting thugs in their place and spouting his way of life. He gambles for the thrill and does things on a whim. Just because he's a man that desires death doesn't mean he pushes that idea onto others, and a lot of times he actually tells people to keep going, not give up, and continue to live, which is really supportive actually. But he's realistic in the way that he's not some philanthropist that's gonna give away all his money willingly and be that morally good, upstanding person. He simply does not give a fuck, and I respect that. At the same time, he's stubborn about how he lives his life, knowing it might not be the quote-unquote right way to live. It's through the conversations and conflicts between other characters that you see multiple sides to this kind of thinking. This is further explored in the manga 10, which is technically the manga that came before Akagi, but is a sequel to the events of Akagi. When 10 finished in 2002, Akagi was still in the Washizu arc. By the time of 10, Akagi Shigeru was a middle-aged old man who had long defeated Washizu, becoming the top of the underworld before retiring early, and was currently just drifting around. He'd already gained his legendary god or Shiniki status, and appears as a supporting character to the titular character 10. So just to briefly review my thoughts on the manga, 10, the nice guy on the path of Tenho, was Fukumoto's first big hit and went on from 1989 to 2002. 10 never got an anime, so once I finished reading Akagi, naturally I wanted to continue the story. The main plot is really just two sides are battling to determine the top of the Japanese underground mahjong world, and that's pretty much it. It has a very small cast of characters and they each have unique playstyles. The main cast consists of hero Hiroyuki, who honestly is more of the main protagonist since as a reader you identify with him a lot more than the others. He's a 20-year-old kid who joins in to get better at mahjong and helps out Ten, who's a rep player and runs a mahjong contracting business. To be honest, I don't really know what that means, but he's basically a mercenary for underground mahjong. And while Akagi is a major character that helps Hiroyuki and gives him wise old man advice, Akagi isn't actually that prominent in the battles themselves, probably why he gets his own series that showcases his badassery. And then finally, the main antagonist, Harada, is, well, the scary Yakuza leader who sets up the conflict. One thing I really like about Hiroyuki is that he's set up as the noob and his personality will make you think he's a loser or a coward, but he's actually a very logical person, which I find is uncommon for his character type. There are moments of cowardice, but it's reasonable given the extreme nature of his opponents. So you really identify with Hiro because you would probably feel the same amount of pressure that he does in that moment. Hiro also isn't weak, and that's actually part of the story. Hiro is just an ordinary guy facing off against the elites. So as the story progresses, Hiro learns to adapt and he gets stronger using a variety of different skills and strategies. Also, even though I know next to nothing about mahjong, I find that because it's a real game, the strategies are much more grounded in reality and doesn't come off as protagonist bullshit. I guess as a kid, I like those supernatural ability sports anime, but as I get older, I've started to really appreciate real sports and the strategies used in it. Between the three of these mangas, 10 is probably the most grounded and realistic. It's not super high stakes like the other two, and while life and death are important themes, at the end of the day they play for the love of the game. And to be honest, it makes the ending of 10 hit that much stronger because there was something in the friends we made along the way that felt much more real. It was the kind of ending that gives you depression for a few days in the same way I felt after reading Oyasumi Punpun or Welcome to the NHK. And as a spoiler warning, I will be discussing the ending of 10 because that's kind of where this whole story concludes. Yeah, so Akagi dies at the end of the manga. Funnily enough, I was spoiled about Akagi's death from the 4-koma short manga Fukumoto All-Stars. And there's actually a page in the fan translation I read that warns you about 10 spoilers. And thinking at the time, oh, I'll probably never read it, I was spoiled by the fact that not only does Akagi die, it explicitly tells you he chose euthanasia after suffering from Alzheimer's disease. And to be honest, I kind of like that ending. Not only is it unique, it seems so right to have Akagi, a man who doesn't fear death, yet craves it through reckless actions, to finally end his own life. He chose his way to live, and he chose his way to die. For those who don't know or care, the final arc starts off years later after events of the main story. Hiroyuki finds out in a newspaper clipping that Akagi died. So he attends his funeral, which is surprisingly crowded, showing how important Akagi was in a lot of people's lives. After that, he gets invited to a sort of secret party that turns out to have all the characters of the main story come together. Akagi is revealed to be alive and puts up a funeral early before he chooses to end his life. And he does so because he is suffering from Alzheimer's and is starting to lose his memories and himself. So each one of them go up to Akagi individually to convince him to live, and each time Akagi isn't swayed. Instead, he lectures forever to each character about the meaning of life and everything. A lot of it is just kind of saying the same thing over and over again, and honestly the sadness was starting to fade out because we do just be talking. After that though, Ten becomes the last person to see him, and that's also when Akagi says his final goodbye. And honestly, it's so freaking sad because you can feel the intensity of Ten entering Akagi's room, trying to calmly talk to him before breaking down and begging for Akagi to live, and then watching Akagi die in front of him while essentially holding his lifeline in his hands kinda got me sobbing. Like, damn bro. Personally, I found the ending more effective to me because it takes out the romanticism of the chronic illness trope. Usually in anime, it's always a tragic love story and there's a beautiful sunset, flowers, and it's all depressing and emotional. And I'm not saying I don't feel anything from it, but I have recognized that these types of stories never really hit that deep. It's a surface level sad that triggers an emotional reaction, but by the time the movie's over, I've moved on. Actually no, I just complain about the writing or the setup. Obviously, it's just personal taste and I'm in the minority for sure, but what separates the 10 manga apart is that Akagi's death felt real. In reality, there's no last words, there's no fanfare and beauty in death. When someone dies, it's sharp and quick. It just ends. It's over. There's nothing. It's the eeriness of emptiness that makes death have weight, ironically enough. In the final chapter, Hiroyuki and Ten visit Akagi's grave but notice it's a total mess because it's littered with offerings. Plus, the gravestone itself is slowly disintegrating because people are literally chipping off the stone as a memento for good luck. But all of this is in a way showing how much people loved Akagi, and it's honestly really wholesome. The entire chapter really sums up the whole story and it gives you such a bittersweet feeling. I won't say these mangas are perfect, heck, I don't even know if I'd say I really like them, Both Akagi and 10 have issues with dragging on for way too long. Even when 10's story was wrapping up, they throw you a curveball and change the rules right at the very end, so they play an additional session that lasts at least 10 more chapters. 10's finale, which should have been like maybe 5 chapters, ended up being around 30. The infamous 20-year Washizu battle was over 200 chapters long, making up about 70% of the entire manga. And I won't deny I practically skipped through the ending of Akagi because I had gotten fed up with every chapter doing pretty much the same thing, especially the long drawn out segments of Washizu's imagination. Maybe the art is kind of fun to look at, but it gets tiresome real quick. But with all that said, Akagi Shigeru himself is really what keeps me interested. Akagi also changes slightly throughout the story. In his youth, he's more brash and stubborn, risking his life in stupid juvenile struggles and throwing himself into senseless fights and gambles. He's kind of just a punk with insane luck and intuition. But as he ages, he becomes calmer and more easygoing. In 10, Akagi really feels like a godly character, a wise old man that helps people find their way in life and quietly pushes them towards their goals. And to my surprise, in the final climax of the story, Akagi loses an important gamble. He takes the L and forfeits, forcing Hiroyuki and 10 to finish the game off. But it also shows how much Akagi respects the game and won't go back on his word. Ultimately, Akagi is a character that I resonate very strongly with, despite having little to no real tangible connection with him, and it's only as I get older I feel more attached to him in a spiritual kind of way, which is different from how I would describe most of my favorite characters. Usually I like them for something as simple as design or personality. It's something about Akagi's way of life that made me feel seen, and sort of puts it into words the way I also view life. The only other character I've ever felt that way before is Solid Snake, but like, that's a whole other can of worms, so we're not going into that. Words could not describe how much I really like Akagi as a character. I genuinely think Akagi is the coolest, the coldest fictional character I've ever seen, and he's a character you can't help but really admire and respect. So having finished both 10 and Akagi now, I'm quite satisfied with both endings. I think getting there can be a pain, especially for someone like me who isn't really in it for the game itself, but the stories show a side of the world we don't often see or talk about, and it's a world I have a keen interest in. Obviously, it's dramatized and cartoony, but there are definitely elements of realism tucked away in certain scenes. It's not so much the entire story, but rather the little bits and pieces that will stay with you forever. It has something to say. If you made it this far, thanks for watching. Halfway through editing, I realized I kind of hated my script, so I rewrote it and condensed some things. I mostly just wanted to talk about Akagi, which is what got me into this rabbit hole. It took me 3 years to finish 10, so I'm happy I finally got to finish the whole story of Akagi Shigeru. If you enjoyed the video, send a like and tell me your thoughts in the comments below. If you're interested in more discussion of niche anime, feel free to subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next one.